In this video, we will talk about the Russian Revolution and examine the upheaval that led to the rise of the Soviet Union. The Russian Revolution is one of the most significant events in modern history. It led to the fall of the Russian Empire and the rise of the Soviet Union, a new socialist state that would shape the world for much of the 20th century. The revolution was a result of deep social, economic, and political problems in Russia, and it unfolded in two main phases: the February Revolution and the October Revolution. Both phases were driven by the struggles of ordinary people, the failures of the government, and the rise of revolutionary ideas. Let's explore this topic in detail. Russia before the revolution. Before the revolution, Russia was a vast empire ruled by a monarch called the Tsar. The Tsar had absolute power, and the people had little say in how the country was run. The majority of Russians were poor peasants who worked on farms, while a small elite class of nobles and landowners controlled most of the wealth and land. Industrialization had begun in the late 19th century, but it was slow and uneven. Workers in cities faced terrible conditions, with long hours, low wages, and no rights. Russia was also struggling with political problems. The Tsar, Nicholas II, was a weak and ineffective leader. He ignored the needs of his people and relied on harsh measures to maintain control. Political parties were banned, and anyone who opposed the government was punished. This created a lot of anger and frustration among the people. In addition to these problems, Russia was involved in World War I, which began in 1914. The war was a disaster for Russia. Millions of soldiers were killed or wounded, and the economy was collapsing. Food and fuel shortages became common, and people were starving. The war exposed the weaknesses of the Tsarist government and made people even more desperate for change. The February Revolution, 1917. The first phase of the Russian Revolution began in February 1917, according to the old Russian calendar. It was March in the modern calendar. It started with protests in the capital city of Petrograd, now St. Petersburg. Workers and soldiers, tired of the war and the shortages, took to the streets demanding bread and an end to the Tsar's rule. The protests grew into a full-scale uprising, and the Tsar's government lost control. The army, which had been loyal to the Tsar, began to side with the protesters. Without the support of the army, Nicholas II had no choice but to step down. On March 15, 1917, he abdicated the throne, ending over 300 years of Romanov rule. A new government, called the Provisional Government, was formed to take his place. The Provisional Government was made up of liberals and moderates who wanted to create a democratic system. However, they made a critical mistake. They decided to continue fighting in World War I. This decision was very unpopular, as people were tired of the war and wanted peace. The Provisional Government also failed to address other urgent issues, such as land reform and workers' rights. As a result, it quickly lost the support of the people. The rise of the Bolsheviks. While the Provisional Government struggled to maintain control, another group was gaining power: the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks were a radical socialist party led by Vladimir Lenin. They promised to end the war, give land to the peasants, and give power to the workers. Their slogan, "Peace, Land, and Bread," resonated with the people. Lenin had been living in exile in Switzerland, but he returned to Russia in April 1917 with the help of Germany, which hoped that Lenin would weaken Russia's war effort. Once back in Russia, Lenin worked tirelessly to build support for the Bolsheviks. He criticized the provisional government and called for a second revolution to overthrow it. The Bolsheviks were not the only revolutionary group in Russia, but they were the most organized and determined. They had a strong base of support among workers and soldiers, and they were able to take advantage of the growing discontent with the provisional government. The October Revolution, 1917. The second phase of the Russian Revolution took place in October 1917, November in the modern calendar. This time, the Bolsheviks led the uprising. On October 25th, they stormed the Winter Palace in Petrograd, where the provisional government was meeting. The government was quickly overthrown, and the Bolsheviks took power. The October Revolution was relatively bloodless compared to the February Revolution, but it marked a dramatic shift in Russian politics. The Bolsheviks established a new government based on socialist principles. They promised to end the war, redistribute land to the peasants, and give workers control of factories. They also began to implement radical reforms, such as nationalizing industry and banks. Civil war and the rise of the Soviet Union. The Bolsheviks' rise to power did not go unchallenged. Many groups opposed them, including supporters of the old Tsarist regime, liberals, and other socialist parties. This led to a brutal civil war that lasted from 1918 to 1922. The Bolsheviks, who called themselves the Reds, fought against the Whites, a loose coalition of anti-Bolshevik forces. The civil war was devastating for Russia. Millions of people died from fighting, famine, and disease. The Bolsheviks eventually emerged victorious, thanks to their strong organization and the leadership of figures like Leon Trotsky, who organized the Red Army. By 1922, the Bolsheviks had consolidated their control over most of the former Russian Empire. In December 1922, the Bolsheviks officially established the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, or the Soviet Union. It was the world's first socialist state, and it was based on the principles of Marxism-Leninism. The Soviet Union would go on to become a major global power, but it was also marked by authoritarian rule, economic problems, and human rights abuses. Key figures of the revolution. Several key figures played important roles in the Russian Revolution. Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the Bolsheviks and the architect of the revolution. He was a brilliant strategist and a passionate advocate for socialism. Leon Trotsky, a key Bolshevik leader who organized the Red Army during the Civil War. Joseph Stalin, a Bolshevik leader who later became the dictator of the Soviet Union. He played a less prominent role in the revolution, but would go on to shape the Soviet Union's future. Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia whose downfall marked the end of the Russian Empire. Alexander Kerensky, the leader of the provisional government, which was overthrown by the Bolsheviks. Impact of the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution had a profound impact on Russia and the world. It ended centuries of Tsarist rule and established a new socialist system. However, it also led to decades of authoritarian rule under the Soviet Union. The revolution inspired other socialist movements around the world, but it also created tensions between the Soviet Union and capitalist countries, leading to the Cold War. In Russia, the revolution brought significant changes. Land was redistributed to peasants, and workers gained more rights. However, the Soviet government also suppressed political dissent and imposed strict controls on the economy and society. The revolution's promise of equality and freedom was not fully realized, and many people suffered under the new regime. The Russian Revolution was a turning point in history. It was driven by the struggles of ordinary people who wanted a better life, but it also led to new challenges and conflicts. The rise of the Soviet Union transformed Russia and had a lasting impact on the world. While the revolution brought hope for a more just and equal society, it also showed the difficulties of achieving such a vision in practice. The legacy of the Russian Revolution continues to be debated, but its importance cannot be denied. What do you think of our video? Let me know in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button. Also, subscribe to our channel before you go. Thank you for watching.